Good day, everyone. It's Londononion back with another discussion on archetype builds, and we'll be tapering our focus on the Hunter. Just like our previous videos, builds will be constructed with the orientation of being a solo artist. As usual, I'll be speaking on the efficacy of archetype pairings with the assumption of playing on the Apocalypse difficulty, my general philosophy being that what works on higher difficulties will usually work on lower ones, and with greater leeway/room for user error. Now there is still a fair amount for me to discover in Remnant 2, and consequently, I may likely revisit this archetype and the proposed pairings in the future. Going hand in hand with this understanding, critical discussions/queries are welcome on this channel, so feel free to share your ideas and/or disagreements. In our last video, we had discussed the Dead to Rights Assassin, or Hunter and Invader. Today we'll be discussing the Dead to Rights Soldier. The Dead to Rights Soldier has the Challenger as the secondary archetype. For simplicity, we'll refer to this pairing as the Soldier for the duration of this discussion. The Challenger is oriented toward toughness, close quarters combat, and thriving while being outnumbered with an edge towards sustaining heavier armor encumbrance. Now the Hunter and Challenger are almost complete opposites in their meta, opposite sides to two different coins. The Hunter thrives from afar and is more predisposed to a surgical method of enemy elimination. The Challenger thrives on being close and personal with a butcher's method of enemy elimination. Taking a quick view of the Hunter and Challenger perks, there is very little synergy, if any at all. Though this may sound critical of the pairing, their polarizing differences serve to be more compensatory. When we had initially introduced the Hunter, it was noted that they do not have any direct defenses. Additionally, a common theme in our recent discussions was compensating the Hunter for being overwhelmed by numerous incoming enemies. Naturally, this is answered directly by the Challenger, whose buffs and skills reward incoming targets with increased toughness and/or damage. To aid with increasing defense, the Challenger is predisposed to wearing heavier armor with less of an encumbrance penalty. Their archetype perk, Strongback, grants an increased dodge weight threshold of 15 units. Both archetypes would benefit from maintaining agility and minimizing stamina costs for the Hunter's survival and the Challenger's efficacy. Ultimately, where the Hunter fails to maintain distance, or where circumstances demand close quarters combat, the Challenger skills and perks can emerge to compensate, and make this pairing a true, well-rounded soldier. With the overview out of the way, we'll move on to the build for this pairing. So starting off with the armor, I decide to go with the Bruiser armor set, which will bring armor effectiveness to 140.4 units, and weight encumbrance at 64.8. Typically, this would place one in the heavy encumbrance bracket, but due to the Challenger archetype trait, one will still occupy the medium weight bracket. As for our weapons, this Onion prefers to use bows or the Widowmaker, in that order. Bows are silent and have greater damage over time, but are less superior in burst damage, and virtually every other weapon stat in comparison. When employing a bow, I go with either the Royal Hunting Bow or the Crescent Moon. I employ Sequence Shot on both for dramatically increased arrow charge rate and critical chance. As for the mod, I prefer Space Crabs or Familiar as an aid to dealing with numerous foes. If using the Widowmaker, I go with the same mods as the bow, but I choose the Slayer Mutator for increased damage on follow-up shots and increased reload speed. The secondary weapon I employ is the double-barreled shotgun. I equip the Song of Aether, or Aether, for staggering and slowing down foes, and Bottom Feeder as the mutator for increased damage as ammo is depleted over time. When maximized, infinite ammo is granted for 5 seconds with a 60-second cooldown. Moving on to the amulet and rings, I decided to go with the Full Moon Circlet, which grants 3% range damage as lifesteal. When at full health, range damage is increased by 20%. This adds a fair layer of recovery while in combat, as well as a significant damage boost incentivizing ranged combat. As for the rings, I employ either Rerouting Cable, Defensive Action Loop, or Tightly Wound Coil for the first slot. Following, I use Hardcore Metal Band, Dying Ember, and Black Cat Band. The first slot will have similar effects, but with their own trade-offs. Rerouting Cable grants 5% of max health as a shield for 5 seconds after expending 20 stamina units and maximizes at 50%. Accumulation resets after 5 seconds of non-stamina consuming activity. Defensive Action Loop increases damage reduction by 10% during a reload and following a reload for 3 seconds. Lastly, Tightly Wound Coil grants a shield for 15% of one's max health for 5 seconds after expending 75% of one's magazine. Due to our weapon choices, Defensive Action Loop and Tightly Wound Coil can be activated frequently for as long as one is in combat. The main trade-off is a value judgment. Either reduce enemy effectiveness by 10% or have an added 15% to one's max health, to which this onion would say they are a toss-up, as it is unclear whether 15% increased temporary health would equate to a 10% damage reduction. The rerouting cable is more of a contingency and would be my first pick of the three, since it plays into the hand of both the hunter and the challenger. It grants extra protection while one is evading, but also provides protection if employing more challenger offensive methods, i.e. charged melee attacks / dodging and countering. Plus, since we already have the Full Moon Circlet providing lifesteal, having protection while on the move leaves more room for user error with a greater shield capacity. Hardcore Metal Band adds a stack of Bulwark for each time one takes damage, and they will individually fall off after 10 seconds. This is intended to cushion the blow of surprise and follow-up enemy attacks. Sometimes a shield won't always be active when receiving damage. Dying Ember is an extra layer of health regeneration, with 6% base damage as lifesteal. Lastly, Black Cat Band is a final layer of defense, saving one from their demise should they receive fatal damage. Next, we'll move on to the skills and strategy discussion. So the skills are what optimize the efficacy of the soldier, and they are static on both sides. For the hunter, I employ Hunter Shroud for reduced enemy awareness, throwing off enemy fire, and the increased damage upon exiting Shroud for 15 seconds. For the challenger side, I employ Rampage, which increases fire rate by 15%, reload speed by 25%, and movement speed by 15% for 10 seconds. Both skills don't last very long, but have the capacity to be increased. We're already aware of the Hunter's prime perk, Dead to Rights, for increasing skill duration with ranged weak spot damage. The Challenger's Rampage, however, can also increase duration with kills or dealing significant damage for a stack of rage. Each stack resets the skill duration and increases range damage by 2.5%. Upon reaching 10 stacks, the Challenger enters a Berserk state, immediately reloads their weapon, and doubles the initial Rampage buffs for 15 seconds. While Rampage is active, both the bow and the double-barreled shotgun become far more devastating with a more seamless reload. Now, I typically do not use both skills together. Rampage is more oriented to offense, while Hunter Shroud is meant to be more for elusiveness and defense. In the event enemies are closing in, are traveling in dangerous numbers for their profile, or if there is an elite in the mix, Rampage is employed to balance out their potential with extra carnage. I typically prefer to use the double-barreled shotgun for this, as it requires less precision and is more dynamic for numerous foes, or bobbing and weaving while easily returning fire. The Song of Aether mod is also quite the valuable aid to stagger enemies, especially if they are tough, in a wide radius while applying slow. The bow can also be used, though I would limit this for elites or other enemies that are best kept at a distance. As for the Hunter Shroud, I prefer to employ this skill if health is getting too low for comfort, and play a more elusive game with either melee or ranged combat. Think Randall's Camouflage from Pixar's Monsters Inc., or the Arbiter from Halo 2, with some differences of course. Using this skill with the bow produces more of a stick and move style from a distance. Meanwhile, using the secondary will make weak spot hits easier and make Shroud last much longer, while dispatching foes like a ghost. Over time, the Full Moon Circlet and Dying Ember will recover one's health with ease. Bonuses, of course, if you're using the Crescent Moon Longbow. Both skills are viable as an offensive method. Shroud is just more of an offense/defense mixture, while Rampage is all stick. To top this off, we'll briefly speak on the Relic, traits, and biome efficacy. My relic of choice is either the Crystal Heart, Void Heart, or the Quilted Heart, as each one will replenish one's health bar completely, though in their own way. The Void Heart, however, is most preferable to this onion. Regardless, with the Soldier, I prefer to treat relics as a last resort, in the event of a bad oopsie. Health regeneration will otherwise be up to the Amulet and Dying Ember Ring. The shards I favor are skill cooldown, armor effectiveness, and either ammo reserves or skill duration. The traits I employ are vigor, endurance, spirit, expertise, amplitude, footwork, bark skin, recovery, and siphoner. Now I construct these builds with the philosophy of you can't lose if you don't die. They are ultimately meant to be generally effective enough to have an answer in virtually every circumstance, provided one's skill, or lack thereof, is not the reason for their demise. However, every archetype and pairing will have their fair share of weaknesses based on their natural abilities and the biomes they explore. My experience in each of the biomes were similar while playing as the Soldier. Whether enemies are airborne, grounded, or mixed in their profiles, the Soldier is well-rounded enough to have an answer. However, it is worth saying that the Soldier, though well-rounded, is a victim of their own strengths. The Hunter is a master of ranged burst damage. The Challenger is a master of melee/close quarters combat. Both are compensatory as a pairing, but will naturally subtract from each other when building for both. The Hunter won't hit as hard, and the Challenger won't be as tough. Both, however, become a more dynamic pair. Otherwise, that concludes our build for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.